Taiwan will burn before China owns it, not because of democracy or freedom, because there's a contract. TSMC's semiconductor fabs are wired for destruction, and the United States holds the detonator. Here's why the island is collateral, not an ally. Picture the scene: TSMC's Hsinchu facility, $70 billion in annual revenue, 92% of the world's advanced chips flowing through clean rooms the size of aircraft carriers. Inside those rooms are $380 million lithography machines, each one approved by Washington, each one monitored by the Pentagon. The engineers know the protocols. If Chinese troops land, if the blockade succeeds, if reunification becomes inevitable, those machines don't get captured. They get destroyed, systematically, permanently. The question isn't if Taiwan remains a tech monopoly trap. It's whether anyone understands that the island was never meant to be independent. It was always meant to be a tripwire with a scorched earth clause. This is lever 1, the production monopoly. Here's why this matters to you before we talk about Taiwan. Every device you own, smartphone, laptop, car, medical equipment, AI system, depends on chips manufactured in a 100-mile radius on an island 100 miles from mainland China. Not largely depends. Not prefers to source from. Depends. 92% of the world's sub-7 nanometer chips come from Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. There is no alternative supplier at scale. None. Now here's the boardroom reality. TSMC isn't a Taiwanese company that happens to be strategically important. It's a controlled asset that happens to be located in Taiwan. The distinction matters. But think of global semiconductor production as a game board. There are only 3 players who can manufacture advanced logic chips: TSMC in Taiwan, Samsung in South Korea, and Intel in the United States. But Samsung focuses on memory, and Intel has spent $50 billion trying to catch TSMC's process technology. They're still 2 generations behind. That leaves TSMC with monopoly pricing power on the only product that matters: advanced logic chips for AI, smartphones, autonomous vehicles, defense systems. The monopoly runs on 2 mechanisms. First, extreme ultraviolet lithography machines from ASML in the Netherlands. These machines cost $380 million each, take 18 months to deliver, and use light wavelengths so precise they can print circuit features 10,000 times thinner than human hair. TSMC has over 50 EUV machines. China has 0. The US blocked all exports in 2019. No EUV machine means no sub-7 nanometer production. No sub-7 nanometer means you're stuck manufacturing 2015-era technology, while your competitors build chips 10 times faster and 5 times more power efficient. Second mechanism: TSMC's 70,000 specialized engineers with institutional knowledge accumulated over 30 years. These aren't generic factory workers. They're process integration specialists who understand how to run 1,000-step production sequences where a single nanometer of deviation ruins a $1 million wafer batch. Training cycle for a senior engineer, 5 to 10 years. You cannot hire this knowledge. You cannot steal it completely. You can only acquire the engineers themselves, and they're Taiwanese citizens under US-aligned government. Here's what this means for you. Apple manufactures 230 million iPhones annually, almost entirely on TSMC chips. NVIDIA's AI accelerators, the chips running ChatGPT, Midjourney, every large language model, 100% TSMC manufactured. Your car's advanced driver assistance system, TSMC. Your laptop's processor, if it's cutting edge, TSMC. If Taiwan's fabs stop operating for 6 months, iPhone production drops 90%. Prices double to $2,400 and above for available units, and the waiting list stretches 2 years. Your car order gets canceled. Your laptop dies, and there's no replacement. The global economy enters recession because there is no plan B at this scale. This monopoly creates a bizarre incentive structure. Every advanced economy, US, Europe, Japan, Korea, needs TSMC operational. That means they need Taiwan stable. But stable doesn't mean independent. It means controlled. Taiwan's value to the United States isn't as a democratic ally. It's as a controlled asset that China cannot be allowed to capture intact. The moment TSMC's technology can be replicated elsewhere, say, in a decade, when US and Japanese fabs catch up, Taiwan's strategic value collapses. The protection guarantee becomes negotiable. You might be thinking, but the US is building fabs in Arizona. We're reducing dependence on Taiwan. Here's the problem with that assumption. TSMC's Arizona facility is projected to produce 20,000 wafers per month by 2025. Taiwan produces 2.5 million wafers per month. That's 1.6% of capacity. Construction costs in Arizona run 5 times higher than Taiwan due to labor, permitting, and supply chain logistics. The technology being produced in Arizona will be 1 generation behind Taiwan facilities. Taiwan moves to 2 nanometers, while Arizona is still ramping 4 nanometers. This isn't diversification, it's theater. The US is building expensive showpiece fabs while remaining 98% dependent on the island. Britain in 1945 forced sterling area nations to hold reserves in London, creating the illusion of British financial centrality. Those reserves couldn't be withdrawn without triggering devaluation. Taiwan in 2024, TSMC holds 92% of advanced chip production, creating the illusion of Taiwanese independence. That production can't be maintained without US export licenses. That's lever 1, production monopoly as choke point. But monopoly alone doesn't explain why Taiwan remains trapped. Here's lever 2, the equipment stranglehold that makes the monopoly permanent. This is lever 2, the equipment stranglehold. Here's why this matters to you. The machines that make advanced semiconductors cannot be built by China, cannot be reverse engineered quickly, and cannot be exported without US approval. This is the kill switch that keeps Taiwan's monopoly locked under American control. Let's talk about ASML. It's a Dutch company, but Dutch is misleading. ASML's EUV machines contain components from over 5,000 suppliers across 800 companies. The light source comes from a California-based Cymer subsidiary. The mirrors, coded to reflect EUV wavelengths with 99.99% precision, come from Zeiss in Germany. The control software runs on US-designed systems. The supply chain is intentionally fragmented across US-aligned nations. You cannot build an EUV machine without touching American intellectual property or components. Picture ASML's factory in Veldhoven, Netherlands. Each EUV machine weighs 180 tons, requires 40 shipping containers, 20 trucks, and 3 cargo planes to transport. Assembly takes 12 months. The machine uses 50,000 watts of power to generate 250-watt EUV light pulses at 50,000 times per second. One machine costs more than a Boeing 737. ASML manufactures roughly 50 to 60 units per year, total global production. And every single export requires approval from the Dutch government, which operates under US export control pressure. The stranglehold works through the CHIPS Act coordination mechanism. In 2022, the US passed $52 billion in domestic semiconductor subsidies, but with strings attached. Now, any company taking US money cannot expand advanced chip production in China for 10 years. This applies to TSMC, Samsung, Intel, and every major foundry. Then the US pressured the Netherlands to block EUV exports to China entirely. No machines shipped to SMIC, China's national champion fab, since 2019. Japan joined with restrictions on deep ultraviolet lithography equipment in 2023. China's response? Spend $150 billion on domestic semiconductor development. Result? China can manufacture 14 nanometer chips, that's 2015 technology, domestically using older DUV equipment. But 14 nanometer to 7 nanometer requires EUV. China's best efforts have produced laboratory prototypes of EUV light sources, still 5 to 10 years from production scale machines. And even if China builds domestic EUV eventually, they're a decade behind. Now Moore's law means that decade costs exponentially more to close. Here's what this means for you. The US controls which nations can access cutting-edge computing. AI models like ChatGPT require training on advanced chips. China's 14 nanometer limitation means their AI systems run 10 times slower, require 10 times more power, and cost 5 times more to operate. Autonomous vehicles need 5 nanometer chips for real-time processing. 5G infrastructure needs 7 nanometer chips for network efficiency. By controlling the equipment, the US determines which countries get future technology and which stay frozen in 2015. This isn't just about Taiwan, It's about who controls the 21st century economy. The equipment stranglehold creates a protection racket. Taiwan cannot manufacture chips without ASML machines. ASML cannot export without US approval. Therefore, Taiwan's entire economy depends on maintaining US export license access. This gives Washington leverage over Taipei that extends far beyond defense policy. When the US wants Taiwan to restrict Chinese investment, block Huawei contracts, or align on trade policy, the implicit threat is EUV license revocation. Taiwan has no negotiating position. Compliance is mandatory. You might be thinking, China will eventually develop domestic EUV machines. Then the stranglehold breaks. Here's the problem with that assumption. Even if China successfully builds domestic EUV by 2030, ASML will have shipped over 400 machines to TSMC, Samsung, and Intel by then. Those companies will be manufacturing 1 nanometer chips using next-generation high-NA EUV systems. China enters the game a decade late, thus building first-generation EUV, while competitors are 3 generations ahead. The technology treadmill never stops. Catching up requires not just building today's machines, but leapfrogging to tomorrow's. And the US has already begun restricting high-NA EUV components to prevent exactly that scenario. Britain in 1947, the US controlled post-war industrial machinery exports to Europe through Marshall Plan conditional lending. Want to rebuild factories? Use American equipment under American financing terms. Taiwan in 2024, the US controls EUV lithography exports through the Netherlands. Want to manufacture advanced chips? Use ASML machines under American export licenses. That's lever 2, equipment stranglehold as kill switch. Taiwan has the fabs, but America controls the machines that make the fabs work. Now here's where it gets darker. Lever 3 is the mechanism that makes Taiwan valuable, not as a partner, but as a tripwire. This is lever 3, the destruction covenant. Here's why this matters to you before we go further. If China invades Taiwan, TSMC's fabs will not be captured. They will be destroyed, systematically, permanently, irreversibly. This isn't speculation, it's operational doctrine. And that doctrine is what makes Taiwan valuable to the United States, not as an ally, but as a tripwire that guarantees mutual destruction in semiconductor supply chains. The mechanism is simple. Taiwan only matters if the fabs work. If China can successfully invade and seize TSMC facilities intact, Beijing gains a 5 to 10-year acceleration in semiconductor capability. The US tech monopoly collapses. China manufactures its own AI chips, its own 5G infrastructure, or its own autonomous vehicle systems, cutting off the US export control lever overnight. This scenario is unacceptable to Washington. Picture TSMC's Fab 18 in Tainan, the world's most advanced semiconductor facility. Inside the clean rooms are 3 nanometer production lines worth $20 billion in equipment. Each EUV machine represents 18 months of lead time. The photoresist chemicals have 90-day supply cycles from Japan. The ultra-pure water systems require constant maintenance. The facility runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with 0 defect tolerance. Now picture what happens if the power grid fails, if the water supply stops, if the chemical storage systems are compromised, if the clean room ventilation shuts down. Within 72 hours, the facility becomes inoperable. Within 7 days, it's permanently damaged. Restarting a contaminated clean room takes 6 to 12 months and costs billions. You don't need explosives to destroy a semiconductor fab. You just need to shut down life support. The destruction covenant operates through 3 layers. Layer 1, passive denial through infrastructure vulnerability. Taiwan's fabs require 50% of the island's electricity generation and 156,000 tons of ultra-pure water daily. In a blockade scenario, China doesn't need to invade, just cut off energy and water. TSMC has 7-day reserves maximum. After that, production stops, equipment degrades, and facilities become unusable. Layer 2, active denial through employee protocols. TSMC's 70,000 engineers are Taiwanese citizens who understand that Chinese occupation means political control, surveillance, and forced technology transfer. As brain drain begins the moment invasion looks credible. Senior engineers with families evacuate to US, Japan, South Korea under visa programs already established. Without the talent, the facilities are just empty buildings full of expensive machines nobody knows how to operate. Layer 3. Explicit denial through sabotage protocols. This is the classified part, but credible reporting from industry sources suggests coordination between TSMC management, Taiwan's defense ministry, and the U.S. Department of Defense on facility denial procedures. The exact mechanisms aren't public, but the options are obvious. Disable EUV machines by destroying mirror assemblies, contaminate clean rooms with particulate matter, corrupt process control software, physically destroy photomask libraries that contain years of research and development. The goal isn't just to stop a production, it's to make restarting impossible for years. Here's what this means for you. If Taiwan's fabs are destroyed, the global semiconductor supply chain collapses overnight, not gradually, not with substitutes, overnight. The $1.2 trillion semiconductor market loses 92% of its advanced production capacity. Tech stocks, Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm, Microsoft, lose 30 to 40% of market value in weeks. Your 401k vaporizes if it's tech heavy. The global economy enters a 5 to 10 year depression while new fabs are built in US, Japan, Europe. Unemployment doubles in consumer electronics. Inflation spikes as existing chips get rationed to critical industries: defense, healthcare, infrastructure. Your phone, your car, your appliances, if they break, there's no replacement for years. The destruction covenant creates a perverse equilibrium. China cannot invade without triggering fab destruction and global economic catastrophe. But the US cannot explicitly commit to Taiwan's defense without removing Chinese caution and potentially accelerating conflict. So we get strategic ambiguity. The US maintains intervention optionality without formal commitment. Taiwan pays $19 billion annually in arms purchases for maybe protection. And TSMC remains perpetually on a tripwire, knowing their facilities are wired for demolition the moment Chinese troops cross the Taiwan Strait. You might be thinking, but wouldn't destroying TSMC hurt the US too? We're 98% dependent on Taiwan. Here's the problem with that assumption. Yes, destruction hurts the US, but capture intact hurts worse. If Taiwan's fabs are destroyed, the US still controls EUV export licenses, still has ASML cooperation, still maintains the technology lead, and can rebuild fabs in Arizona, Ohio, Texas over 5 to 10 years, while China remains stuck at 14 nanometers. But if China captures TSMC intact, Beijing immediately controls 92% of advanced chip production, can reverse engineer TSMC's processes, and breaks US export control leverage permanently. The US loses the tech war in one move. Destruction preserves long-term monopoly control. Capture ends it. That's why the covenant exists. Now we have to address the elephant in the room, the critical vulnerability. The destruction protocols only work if executed before Chinese capture. A successful rapid invasion, 48 to 72 hour scenario, where Chinese special forces seize fabs before sabotage activates, collapses the entire mechanism. This is the scenario that keeps Pentagon planners awake. If China can land forces, secure facilities, and establish control before employees evacuate or protocols trigger, they capture the crown jewel intact. Some reports suggest China has been training special forces units, specifically for facility seizure operations, targeting TSMC. The window between invasion start and irreversible facility damage might be as short as 24 hours. Whoever controls that window controls the outcome. Britain in 1956, facing Suez Canal nationalization by Egypt, British military planned Operation Musketeer with contingency protocols to destroy canal infrastructure, rather than let Nasser control it intact. The US forced Britain to stand down, but the sabotage plans existed. Taiwan in 2024, facing reunification threats from China. US and TSMC maintain operational protocols for facility destruction, rather than let Beijing capture fabs intact. This time, the sabotage plans are active. That's Lever 3, Destruction Covenant as tripwire. Taiwan remains valuable precisely because it cannot be captured intact. But the covenant only works if the US maintains intervention optionality without commitment. Here's Lever 4, Strategic Ambiguity as the option premium that keeps Taiwan paying for protection. This is Lever 4, Strategic Ambiguity. Here's why this matters to you. The United States does not have a formal defense treaty with Taiwan. Not a mutual defense pact, not a NATO-style commitment, not even a written guarantee of intervention. On what the US maintains is optionality, the maybe promise that keeps Taiwan dependent and China cautious without actually locking Washington into conflict. Here's the boardroom logic. A formal defense commitment makes Taiwan less valuable, not more. If the US signs a treaty promising to defend Taiwan, Beijing calculates the invasion cost upfront and Taiwan stops paying for ambiguity. But with optionality, Taiwan must continuously buy US weapons, continuously align with US policy, and continuously hope that semiconductor centrality guarantees intervention. It's a protection racket with no contract, just an implication that maybe, if the situation is right, if the politics align, if the strategic calculation makes sense, the US will intervene. Picture the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979. It's the document that governs US-Taiwan relations after Washington switched diplomatic recognition to Beijing. Here's what it says. The US will provide Taiwan with defensive weapons, will maintain capacity to resist coercion against Taiwan, and considers threats to Taiwan a matter of grave concern. Notice what's missing. The United States will defend Taiwan. The language is deliberately vague. Grave concern doesn't mean intervention. Capacity to resist doesn't mean commitment. It's optionality pricing. Taiwan pays the premium, the US keeps the option to intervene, and nobody knows if the option will be exercised until the moment arrives. Strategic ambiguity operates through weapons sales as insurance premiums. Taiwan spends $19 billion annually on US arms. F-16 fighter jets, Harpoon missiles, HIMARS rocket systems, and Patriot missile batteries. These weapons provide some defensive capability, but not enough to defeat China independently. A 2023 wargame by the Center for Strategic and International Studies concluded that Taiwan would lose in 3 weeks without US intervention, even with current arms purchases. The weapons aren't sold to make Taiwan defensible, they're sold to make Taiwan expensive to invade and to lock Taipei into dependence on US supply chains for spare parts, ammunition, and maintenance. The ambiguity serves 3 functions. First, it deters China from invasion by preserving uncertainty about US response. If China knew the US wouldn't intervene, invasion becomes viable. If China knew the US definitely would intervene, Beijing can prepare asymmetric responses. Cyber attacks on US infrastructure, blockade instead of invasion, or accelerated timeline before US military readiness improves. Ambiguity keeps China guessing. Second function, it controls Taiwan. If Taiwan had guaranteed US protection, Taipei could take risks, declare independence, develop nuclear weapons, provoke Beijing. Ambiguity means Taiwan must stay cautious. Any action that triggers Chinese retaliation might not receive US support. Taiwan stays compliant. Third function, it preserves US optionality. If semiconductor fabs are destroyed before invasion, the US can choose not to intervene. Taiwan's value as tripwire is already realized through fab denial. If fabs somehow remain intact and capturable, the US can intervene to prevent Chinese seizure. The flexibility lets Washington respond to circumstances rather than being locked into commitment. Now, here's what this means for you. Strategic ambiguity is why your devices depend on an island 100 miles from mainland China with no formal US security guarantee. If the US signed a defense treaty, Taiwan might get complacent, China might accelerate invasion timelines, and the semiconductor supply chain becomes even more fragile. If the US withdrew completely, Taiwan falls within 6 to 24 months. China controls TSMC, and US tech dominance collapses. Ambiguity is the uncomfortable middle state that keeps the system functioning, barely. The option premium creates parallel dependencies. Taiwan depends on US weapons and intervention possibility. But the US depends on Taiwan's fabs remaining operational and inaccessible to China. Neither side has full leverage. Taiwan cannot stop buying US weapons without losing intervention optionality. The US cannot stop selling weapons without Taiwan exploring alternatives. Closer ties with China, nuclear weapons development, or neutrality. It's mutual dependence disguised as alliance, with neither party able to exit without catastrophic loss. You might be thinking, but semiconductor importance means the US has to defend Taiwan. Strategic ambiguity is just political theater. Here's the problem with that assumption. Semiconductor importance makes fab destruction guaranteed, not US intervention. The US has 2 viable strategies: intervene to preserve fabs, or allow destruction and rebuild domestically over 5 to 10 years. Both strategies preserve long-term U.S. monopoly control, but only fab destruction guarantees China doesn't win. If the U.S. intervenes and loses, China gains Taiwan and destroys U.S. military credibility in Asia. The strategic catastrophe is total. Strategic ambiguity keeps the option open while ensuring fab destruction happens, regardless of intervention choice. Taiwan thinks U.S. protection is guaranteed. It's not. Fab denial is guaranteed. That's the difference. Britain from 1947 to 1954. The U.S. provided Marshall Plan aid to Western Europe, but refused formal defense commitments to colonies like Malaya or Kenya. British territories paid for their own security without guarantee of U.S. intervention. Taiwan from 1979 to present. The U.S. ended formal defense treaty but maintains the Taiwan Relations Act with intervention optionality. Taiwan pays for its own security without guarantee of U.S. intervention. That's lever 4, strategic ambiguity as option premium. Taiwan pays billions annually for maybe protection. The U.S. preserves flexibility, and everyone pretends it's an alliance. Now here's the final lever, and it's the one that locks everything in place. Lever 5. Controlled diversification as the illusion of exit. This is lever 5, controlled diversification. Here's why this matters to you. The United States is building semiconductor fabs in Arizona, Ohio, and Texas. TSMC is building fabs in Arizona and Japan. Samsung is expanding in Texas. Intel is building in Ohio. Every politician talks about reshoring and supply chain resilience. Here's what nobody says. It's theater. The diversification is real enough to relieve political pressure, but too small to change the strategic calculus. Taiwan remains the choke point, and that's the point. Let's run the numbers. TSMC Arizona Fab 21 is projected to produce 20,000 wafers per month by 2025. TSMC Taiwan produces 2.5 million wafers per month. That's 1.6% of capacity. Construction costs in Arizona run $40 billion for the facility, 5 times the cost of equivalent capacity in Taiwan due to labor, permitting, environmental regulations, and supply chain logistics. The technology node being produced in Arizona will be 4 nanometers and 3 nanometers. But by the time the fab reaches full production in 2027, Taiwan will be manufacturing 2 nanometers and preparing for 1.4 nanometers. Arizona is perpetually one generation behind. Picture the ribbon-cutting ceremony for TSMC Arizona. Politicians celebrate bringing chips home. TSMC executives smile for cameras. But in the boardroom, the calculation is different. The Arizona fab exists to satisfy U.S. political demands for domestic production. It provides just enough capacity to supply Apple with some chips for Made in USA marketing. It gives Intel and Samsung a competitive excuse. Even TSMC can't manufacture profitably in America. And it locks TSMC into deeper dependence on U.S. market access. If you've invested $40 billion in American infrastructure, you're not going to antagonize Washington. The controlled diversification serves as a pressure release valve. Without it, U.S. politicians might demand actual reshoring, forced technology transfer, export bans, or seizure of TSMC intellectual property. By building a small-scale fab, TSMC shows good faith. The U.S. declares victory on reshoring, and the core dependency remains intact. Japan's TSMC fab in Kumamoto plays the same role. 25,000 wafers per month in mature nodes, 12 nanometers to 28 nanometers, not cutting-edge production. It supplies regional customers and satisfies Japanese government subsidies without threatening Taiwan's central position. Here's what this means for you. The reshoring narrative is designed to make you feel secure about semiconductor supply chains without actually changing the risk. If Taiwan's fabs go offline tomorrow, Arizona and Japan combined provide less than 2% of replacement capacity. Your iPhone still doesn't get made. Your car still doesn't ship. The illusion of diversification is worse than no diversification. It creates complacency while leaving the vulnerability fully intact. The illusion exit ensures Taiwan remains locked in position. If diversification were real, now Taiwan's leverage would decline. TSMC's monopoly pricing would face competition. The destruction covenant would lose urgency. But because diversification is controlled, just enough to relieve political pressure, never enough to provide alternatives, Taiwan stays trapped as the collateral asset. The fabs in Arizona and Japan aren't escape routes. They're proof that escape is impossible at the scale required. Britain from 1968 to 1976 announced withdrawal from east of Suez military commitments while maintaining Bermuda, Falklands, Gibraltar as residual presence. Appeared to be reducing imperial footprint but retained critical choke points. The U.S. from 2020 to present announces TSMC Arizona fab construction while maintaining 98% Taiwan dependence. Appears to be reshoring semiconductors but retains Taiwan centrality. Those are the 5 levers: production monopoly, equipment stranglehold, destruction covenant, strategic ambiguity, controlled diversification. Here's why they won't break, and why that's the design. Same clean rooms, same machines, different timelines. The engineers at TSMC's Aishinshu facility know the protocols. They know what happens if the sirens sound. They know the fabs were never meant to survive intact. The question was never whether Taiwan would remain independent. It was whether anyone would notice the island had become collateral, a controlled asset wired for destruction, valuable precisely because it can never be captured whole. The clock isn't counting down to invasion. It's been counting down since the first EUV machine arrived, since the first destruction protocol was written, since the moment Washington realized the only way to win was to make sure nobody else could either. The tripwire is alive.